Welcome to my little bubble of insanity. My Psychosis, a tale to be told. A tale about life, the universe and everything. A story about insanity, madness and severe mental illness. A story about enlightenment that turned to madness. A love story, a God story, a waking up from reality story, a mind-reading, dimension-swapping superhero story. The end of the world and the beginning of heaven. Not to be taken literal, told how I experienced it back then, without any boring rationalization or psychological models trying to explain it. Just pure, unfiltered madness. An attempt to get it out there, to get over it, and to start again with life. Oh great, it's a fat guy in a bubble. My English is fucking terrible and I'm fat. Reading from a little notebook of madness where I wrote it all down all those years ago. So let's get this going, relax, sit back and enjoy the story of madness, or as I was convinced back then, enlightenment. First, something about me, or about me all those years ago. I was raised by two artists, academics, and never really believed in God. Not having read the Bible once and never seen a church from the inside. Religion was never a part of my life, at all. So, it was a pretty big surprise for me that this psychosis would take such a hyper-religious turn. I would have guessed that if I got psychotic one day, I'd go more with the government conspiracy mind control stuff. But I'm glad I experienced and interpreted it the way I did. The psychosis itself, from a very subjective point of view, was, well, fucking awesome. Most people don't experience it this way. But at times it also got really scary. For example, when I got too close to Satan and was convinced of being trapped in hell. Now, a little disclaimer. Just this one time. This is just the way I experienced it back then. So don't take something like this as literal Satan. More like all the fear and anxiety and negativity inside my own psyche that somehow took this form. Just to make clear that nothing I'll speak of in these videos is to be taken literal. That's only what I thought was literally going on. It's a true story though, only told exactly like I experienced it back then. Which doesn't mean it actually happened. Just so we're clear on this. But feel free to have your own interpretations of this whole thing. I'm still not sure what actually happened back then. And probably I never will. Okay, now let's finally begin with this. You may recognize this music from Space Odyssey. A great movie with a great soundtrack. And this specific piece of music was composed by Strauss and is called "And Thus Spoke Zarathustra." Nietzsche's Zarathustra, with his famous claim that God is dead. I was never interested in philosophy, but through coincidence I got my hands on Nietzsche's famous book "And Thus Spoke Zarathustra," which I read completely. My psychotic mother, who was in the mental clinic at that time, asked me one day to print out the first chapter of this book. I did this and I read it too and thought it was beautiful. I bought the whole book and read it multiple times and I was astounded how much it spoke to me. I could understand Nietzsche completely. I remember looking through a reader's notes book for it and was astounded that people needed those kind of helping guides, as I could understand every single thing Nietzsche wrote about. I got pretty cocky about it too, as my whole thinking seemed to improve. I call it thinking 2.0. Everything started to make more and more sense and it felt like I would get close to the ultimate truth. Then I read up on Nietzsche himself, and at the same age he was professor in the same city at the same university I was in. Writing this very book I was reading now, and this was like it was written for me, and only for me. In fact, one day this thought flashed up, and it felt like the truth. I was Nietzsche's reincarnation. He knew the truth and had to conserve it for his future self, so he wrote something that could be conserved through all these centuries and would be read by one of his next reincarnations. I never believed in something like reincarnation. Nietzsche probably either. But this seemed to be the truth nonetheless. In fact, Zarathustra was a metaphor for my person, for me. This book was really an instruction manual for me to guide me through this coming time, and I would always carry it with me. The part about God being dead, well, this should prove to be just one big inside joke. It was a stressful time for me back then, and I smoked a lot of pot. And I meditated to cope with my depression I suffered from back then. And when I say I smoked a lot of pot, I mean insane amounts of pot every single day. About $1,500 worth of pot every month. For years. I kid you not. I'm surprised how I even managed to do that. I was also studying and working on the side, plus I created a now very successful company together with a friend of mine. Well, getting more and more psychotic, I probably didn't help that much in the end, and I only mention this because later on God wouldn't be too pleased with this business, and I can definitely see why. Sometimes, even years before this all happened, when I smoked weed alone, I had the urge to utter these words. I'm immortal. I'm immortal. I'm immortal. I never really asked why I did this, I just did. This is the first thing that I can remember in hindsight that was kinda strange. I also hadn't visited the lectures at university for the past years. I just showed up at the finals at the end of semester and in most cases somehow even got a decent grade. Point is, I started to get strange and to isolate myself. Smoking pot didn't help this either, but I felt like it did actually help with my depression. Also, to cope with those depressions, I had started to meditate. Usually in the evening for about 2 hours every day. But not to gain enlightenment or for any esoteric or spiritual reasons. Just as a therapy for depression. I didn't seek what should happen next. And here's where the story begins. One evening, while in a deep meditative state, something most extraordinary happened. Now, if people ask me what I experienced, it goes usually something like this.
しかしあれの記憶か。あれね。
なんかやばい。
やばいっていうかすごい。なんかすごい。精神がいかれるかも。下手すりゃ廃人。
I plan on using scenes from anime now and then in these videos, as they are a good metaphor for some of the things that happened to me. And it should also make things a little bit more entertaining for you to watch. I haven't watched this anime yet at this point, but basically, this is what happened.
ものすごい量の情報を直接頭にぶち込まれたみたいだった。頭が割れそうだった。だけど唐突に理解した。これが真理。
I can't describe it at all though. This was just a metaphor. As is alchemy, by the way. If you are interested in this, C.G. Young's book, Alchemy and Psychology, explains this concept very well. What I did to get there? Well, while meditating, I observed my own thoughts. At one point I would say to myself, who is it that observes these thoughts? If it's not the thoughts itself. It must be something bigger than myself. I suddenly had a very strange sensation. A feeling of immense beauty overcame me, with an intensity I never felt before in my life. Everything was just so beautiful. This sensation is hard to describe, but suddenly my thoughts were racing. I had the impression that everything that I ever lived through in my life came up from my unconsciousness. All my memories, all the people I knew, the whole universe suddenly fell into one big picture, into God's great plan. Everything made sense, but the thoughts were coming way too fast. I couldn't grasp them. I was convinced that this was God showing me everything. His whole plan unfolded before me. For that I could see better, He would lift me into heaven as I perceived it. I began to dissolve into everything. I became everything. My inside merged with the outside. A very strange sensation and very hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced something like, I guess you can call it ego death, for himself. I would start to dissolve completely. Time would start to slow down, eternity started, and I had this very beautiful feeling of God looking after me. I felt like a child in the arms of my protecting mother. Next thing I know, I'm on my bed again in my room where I meditated lying down, and my mind was empty and calm again. And I hear a voice coming from my inside, together with this warm feeling of parental love and protection again. The voice says I should repeat what I'm being told after it, and so I do. All I know is that I know nothing. All I know is that I know nothing. And, asks the voice, it's not that easy. I can only let you see the truth by showing you the way, but the one to grasp it has to be you. All I know is that I know nothing, and therefore I try to think, and a thought flashed up, and therefore I understand. Good, I hear inside my head. Very good. Continue. I remember the flood of thoughts that came over me earlier, and I touch the surface of my bed. I stroke it, and I can feel the fine texture of it. I touch the walls and feel the surface, really feel it. All those little bumps, the gentle vibration of my finger. I grasp my pillow. I literally grasp it with my fingers, but also with my mind. I grasp the bed sheets again, and then my body, my belly, my chest. I grasp my bed, the wood it consists of, and I grasp the floor below my bed. I grasp God. God is everything. God is I, and I am God. All I know is that I know nothing, therefore I understand, and because I understood, I grasp you, and because I grasp you, I know everything. All I know is that I know nothing, and therefore I understand, and because I understood, I grasped you, and because I grasped you, I know everything. Those were my last words before falling asleep soon after, only to wake up to a much different life. That's enough for today. I will tell you all about the next day in the next video. My Psychosis should go on for all those coming weeks, with a lot of the most extraordinary stuff going on, so there's much to tell. If you think that this here was insane already, or if you think I just made that all up, you have heard nothing yet. It will get much more strange pretty soon. Until we meet again.